Under the relentless blaze of the June sun, the dusty square of Lakewood Springs simmered with a tension that made the air itself seem to tremble. The townsfolk gathered, a mix of curious onlookers and cold-hearted spectators, their faces etched with expressions ranging from awkward silence to morbid fascination. At the center of this grim theater stood a makeshift platform, rough-hewn and splintered, upon which a young woman, barely more than a child, clung to her shattered dignity. Her disheveled hair hung like a curtain, partially shielding a fresh bruise blooming dark and angry across her pale cheek. Emily Dawson, just 19, was the final lot of the day's auction. A living commodity, bartered between her own weary parents, who stood nearby with hollow, defeated eyes that told stories of a life beaten down by hardship and desperation. Voices broke the stifling stillness as bids were shouted out, each one a dagger to her fading hope. Frank Thompson, the local tavern owner with a predatory grin, raised his hand confidently, his voice slicing through the murmurs. $25. A cold shiver ran through Emily's frame, betraying the terror beneath her stoic facade. Not far off, Walter Barnes, a farmer known for his brutal temper and unsteady grip after a drink or two, pressed the stakes higher at $30. The crowd shifted uneasily, watching the unfolding spectacle with a mixture of disdain and a perverse appetite for cruelty. At the back, Elijah Carter stood apart, a lone figure in worn clothes, fists clenched tight against the stinging injustice. He was a man weathered by loss, the only black landowner in the region, and the money he raised now was every last cent he had saved to keep his farm alive through a merciless drought. When his deep voice finally cut through the clamor with a firm bid of $50, the square fell into a stunned hush. Eyes turned sharply toward him, shock and barely veiled outrage flickering in dozens of white faces. The auctioneer hesitated, the weight of unspoken rules and simmering prejudice hanging thick in the summer air. Yet Elijah held his ground, knowing full well the price he was willing to pay was more than just dollars. It was a bold defiance against a world that sought to crush him. Emily's trembling steps echoed softly as she descended from the rickety platform, each movement weighed down by the invisible chains of her past. Her eyes, heavy with resignation, rarely dared to meet the faces that circled around her like vultures, their whispers sharp and unforgiving. Yet beneath the surface of fear and exhaustion flickered a quiet ember of defiance. A spark Elijah had seen mirrored in his own weary gaze when their eyes briefly locked. He helped her into the waiting wagon, his hands steady but gentle, as if the fragile girl were a rare treasure rather than a mere transaction. The murmurs of the crowd swelled into an uneasy chorus of disbelief and venom. A black man buying a white girl? This will not end well, someone spat, while another muttered, "He's made a mistake. No one will forgive." Elijah ignored the taunts, the weight of their hostility pressing into his back like cold steel. He knew the cost of his gamble, not just the money that dwindled from his savings, but the wrath of a town built on prejudice and power. Emily's body shook, not from fear of him, but from the ghosts of all she had endured, the bruises hidden beneath her worn dress, the silent lessons etched into her every move. To look down meant survival, to speak meant punishment. "I won't hurt you," Elijah whispered, his voice low, meant only for her ears. The words hung in the air, fragile yet resolute. For the first time, Emily's eyes met his fully, revealing a soul tempered by pain but unwilling to be extinguished. "Why?" she asked simply, her voice barely above a breath. Elijah hesitated then, with a quiet strength, he replied, "Because I know what it's like to be treated like property, to be sold and silenced. But I refuse to let that be the end of our story." As the wagon rumbled away from the hostile square, the heavy gaze of the townspeople followed them, unaware of the silent pact forged between two survivors, a pact that would ignite a fire far greater than anyone could have imagined. The journey to Elijah's cabin stretched 6 long miles beyond the dusty streets of Lakewood Springs, winding through parched fields cracked by drought and a sparse oak forest that whispered ancient secrets in the breeze. As the wagon creaked to a halt, Emily's eyes flickered with cautious calculation, scanning the modest dwelling ahead, weathered but sturdy, a sanctuary carved from hardship and stubborn hope. Elijah dismounted with practiced ease, his gaze sweeping over the land that was more than just soil and stone. It was a testament to his resilience and a battlefield where dreams fought against despair. "This is it," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years spent battling storms, both natural and human. Emily lingered on the wagon, the shadows of doubt clinging to her like a second skin, before stepping down with measured steps, keeping a wary distance. Elijah gestured toward the back of the cabin. "There's a room for you there, once my son's. It locks from the inside." The mention of Jacob, his son who had died 2 winters past, cast a brief shadow across his features, a loss carved deep into his soul but worn without self-pity. Inside, the cabin breathed a different air than the town. Simple, yes, but orderly, marked by a quiet dignity. A lamp burned steadily on the central table, a beacon in the dim light, signaling that this refuge was not abandoned, but watched over. Emily's posture stiffened, a flicker of tension flashing across her eyes as she noticed the small details. The carefully arranged books, the neat garden outside ravaged by the drought but lovingly tended. Elijah's eyes met hers with understanding. "Ruth was here," he said softly. "She left food." Ruth Williams, the midwife, a guardian angel in these harsh lands. Emily's lips parted slightly, surprised, as if realizing this place held more allies than enemies. Yet beneath the surface, the weight of the past clung fiercely to her, and the questions of trust and survival writhed silently between them like the restless wind outside. The journey to Elijah's cabin stretched 6 long miles beyond the dusty streets of Lakewood Springs, winding through parched fields cracked by drought and a sparse oak forest that whispered ancient secrets in the breeze. As the wagon creaked to a halt, Emily's eyes flickered with cautious calculation, scanning the modest dwelling ahead, weathered but sturdy, a sanctuary carved from hardship and stubborn hope. Elijah dismounted with practiced ease, his gaze sweeping over the land that was more than just soil and stone. It was a testament to his resilience and a battlefield where dreams fought against despair. "This is it," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years spent battling storms, both natural and human. Emily lingered on the wagon, the shadows of doubt clinging to her like a second skin, before stepping down with measured steps, keeping a wary distance. Elijah gestured toward the back of the cabin. "There's a room for you there, once my son's. It locks from the inside." The mention of Jacob, his son who had died 2 winters past, cast a brief shadow across his features, a loss carved deep into his soul but worn without self-pity. Inside, the cabin breathed a different air than the town. Simple, yes, but orderly, marked by a quiet dignity. A lamp burned steadily on the central table, a beacon in the dim light, signaling that this refuge was not abandoned, but watched over. Emily's posture stiffened, a flicker of tension flashing across her eyes as she noticed the small details, the carefully arranged books, the neat garden outside ravaged by the drought but lovingly tended. Elijah's eyes met hers with understanding. "Ruth was here," he said softly. "She left food." Ruth Williams, the midwife, a guardian angel in these harsh lands. Emily's lips parted slightly, surprised, as if realizing this place held more allies than enemies. Yet beneath the surface, the weight of the past clung fiercely to her, and the questions of trust and survival writhed silently between them like the restless wind outside. Dawn had barely broken when the first horse hooves thundered against the dry earth, shattering the fragile peace surrounding Elijah's cabin. 3 men approached, their presence like a storm rolling in over the cracked fields. Frank Thompson, Walter Barnes, and a tall, impeccably dressed stranger with an unsettling calm in his eyes. Judge Harrison, the new county judge. Elijah dropped his hoe, muscles tightening beneath sun-baked skin as he stood tall to face the trio. "Mr. Carter," Frank began with a forced politeness that didn't mask the malice beneath. "We're here on behalf of the county. There's a need to inspect your property and evaluate its productivity." The words hung heavy, veiling the true intent behind a thin veil of civility. Elijah's voice was steady, unwavering. "My taxes are paid. Always have been. This land is mine, legally registered since 1869. The judge's gaze flickered with something unreadable. Walter sneered. "Productivity's the issue. Unproductive land can be seized and reassigned for more efficient use." The 3 advanced closer, casting long shadows over the parched earth, the weight of authority pressing down like the oppressive summer heat. Elijah's jaw clenched, yet his expression remained a stoic mask against the threat. Behind his quiet defiance lay a storm of determination. This land was more than dirt and weeds. It was a legacy, a promise to his late wife and son, a symbol of survival. As the men left, their footsteps fading into the dry wind, Elijah's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. The fight for his land was far from over, and beneath the surface of cracked soil, something far more valuable than crops or cattle lay hidden. A secret he guarded fiercely, waiting for the right moment to reveal. Emily watched from the doorway, tension coiling in her chest as the reality of their precarious refuge settled around them like dust. The war for justice had quietly begun. Under the cloak of a sudden storm that swept through Lakewood Springs, Emily moved like a shadow, her dark cloak shielding her from prying eyes as she slipped silently behind the town hall. The rain hammered down, washing the dust from the streets, but doing nothing to dampen the tension that gripped her heart. Clutching the small, ornate key hidden in her shoe, she navigated the labyrinth of corridors with practiced stealth, each step measured and quiet. The locked drawer in the mayor's office was the final barrier between the truth and the lies spun by those who wielded power like weapons. Her fingers trembled as she fitted the key into the lock, the click echoing loudly in the emptiness. Inside lay documents, maps, ledgers, telegrams, all revealing a conspiracy to seize land before the railroad's arrival, a plan crafted by Mayor Reynolds and Judge Harrison to line their pockets at the expense of the townspeople. Meanwhile, miles away and soaked to the bone, Elijah entered the telegraph office, where James Miller awaited, the operator's quiet sympathies a balm to the weary. The telegraph line hummed softly, open to Boston, where allies waited. Professor Anderson and others ready to amplify their fight for justice beyond the town's dusty borders. As the storm raged outside, the undercurrent of rebellion flowed steadily beneath the surface, linking their actions in a tapestry of resistance. Emily's heart pounded, knowing that discovery would mean ruin, yet her resolve burned brighter than ever. In that charged silence between raindrops, the seeds of revolution were sown. Small, deliberate acts of courage weaving a narrative no tyrant could silence. The town's power brokers, oblivious to the storm brewing within their own walls, were about to be blindsided by a force born of desperation, intellect, and an unyielding will to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. The morning sun barely pierced the lingering shadows as whispers of panic rippled through Lakewood Springs. In the grand hall of the town, an empty cabinet stood as the stark symbol of the upheaval. Its contents, crucial documents, had vanished without a trace. Mayor Reynolds paced frantically, pale and trembling, his voice sharp with accusation. Documents don't just disappear. Judge Harrison, adjusting his tie with a nervous twitch, shot back. The cabinet was locked tight. Only I hold the key. The uneasy truce among the conspirators cracked under the weight of suspicion. Frank Thompson poured himself a stiff drink at the tavern, muttering dark warnings about Elijah Carter. That man's trouble, mark my words. Yet they had no idea the truth was already slipping through their grasp. Across town, Ruth Williams moved with quiet determination, posting copies of the stolen papers on the doors of the church, market, and city hall. Each sheet was a carefully crafted revelation, exposing the web of deceit spun by the mayor and his allies. The townspeople's curiosity turned to outrage as they absorbed the damning evidence, their eyes opening to the corruption that had poisoned their lives for too long. The sheriff, once hesitant, now stood firm, blocking Walter Barnes's desperate attempt to flee. Not everything, he said grimly, but enough to stop what's coming. Faces that had once averted their gaze now stared with reluctant respect at Elijah, the man who had dared to defy the powerful. Then, from the steps of the church, Emily appeared, flanked by Reverend Collins. Her voice rang clear and steady as she revealed the crucial evidence against the town's most trusted leaders, risking everything to bring the truth to light. Her father's furious glare cut through the crowd, but Emily stood unflinching, the embodiment of courage, born from pain. As the federal officer stepped forward to affirm the weight of her testimony and the public telegram arrived condemning Judge Harrison's dark past, the fragile walls of corruption crumbled, and Lakewood Springs was forced to confront its own sins. The dawn broke over Lakewood Springs with a fragile promise of change, as the first whistle of the new railroad train sliced through the crisp morning air. A crowd had gathered, their faces a patchwork of anticipation, hope, and lingering disbelief. Elijah Carter stood quietly among them, his weathered hands folded, eyes fixed on the towering station that now stood where once there had been only empty dreams and broken promises. This station was more than steel and timber. It was a testament to a battle hard fought, a victory not just for a man, but for a community long suffocated by greed and corruption. Around him, children of all colors, black, white, immigrant, wove through the throng, their laughter a vibrant counterpoint to the somber memories etched in the older generation's eyes. Emily, now Emily Carter, wore a simple dress and carried herself with the same quiet strength that had carried her through the darkest days. She stood beneath the shade of a sprawling oak, the school she helped found just behind her, where eager young minds gathered to learn and dream. The old tavern, once a den of whispers and plots, lay shuttered, a relic of a past now laid to rest. Mayor Reynolds was gone, serving time behind bars. Judge Harrison had fled and been captured under a false name, his reign ended by the courage of those he tried to crush. Frank Thompson's fall from grace was complete, now working far from the town's heart, a shadow of his former self. And Emily's father, Mr. Dawson, reduced to a broken man, haunted by the very daughter he'd tried to sell. As the new mayor spoke of progress and renewal, his words barely rippled the crowd's energy. Eyes remained fixed on the Carters, symbols of resilience and hope. "It's thanks to you," an elderly woman whispered to Emily, her voice thick with gratitude, "that my son finally has a future." Across the platform, a young boy with a crooked leg, dressed in his new railroad uniform, waved cheerfully, embodying the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The revolution they had sparked was not one of fire and fury, but of unwavering spirit and the building of bridges where once only walls had stood. In the wake of the railroad's triumphant arrival, Lakewood Springs began to pulse with a new life, its streets humming with voices once silenced by fear and oppression. The modest cabin of Elijah Carter had transformed into a beacon of hope, now sharing its humble space with a bustling schoolhouse where children of all backgrounds gathered under the shade of ancient trees. Emily Carter, once a silent girl weighed down by scars both seen and unseen, stood at the heart of this vibrant community, her presence a quiet testament to endurance and renewal. The lessons she taught went beyond reading and writing. They were lessons of dignity, courage, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. Town meetings, once exclusive gatherings of the powerful few, had given way to diverse councils where voices once drowned now resonated with authority and respect. The walls that had divided families and neighbors were crumbling, replaced by bridges of understanding and collaboration. Elijah often spoke to his students about the true meaning of revolution, not the tearing down of walls with violence, but the building of bridges where chasms once yawned wide. His story and Emily's intertwined like the roots of the towering oaks surrounding their school, grounding a community in a shared past and a hopeful future. Meanwhile, the shadows of those who had sought to maintain oppression faded into memory. Former Mayor Reynolds languished in prison, his empire of deceit dismantled. Judge Harrison's escape was short-lived, his capture under an alias marking the final fall of corrupt power. Frank Thompson's once thriving tavern had become a distant memory as he toiled anonymously along a faraway river. Emily's father, stripped of pride and influence, drifted through life as a hushed cautionary tale. Yet amid the changes, the true victory belonged to those who refused to accept the chains imposed upon them. Their journey from despair to empowerment was etched in every smile that lit the schoolyard, every handshake in council halls, and every train whistle that echoed beyond the hills. Reminders that dignity and justice, once thought lost, could be reclaimed and nurtured anew. Under the warm glow of an orange evening sky, Elijah and Emily stood together overlooking the town they had helped transform, a place once fractured by greed and prejudice, now shimmering with quiet promise. The city lights twinkled like stars brought down to earth, each one a story of resilience and renewal. "When I stood on that platform, sold like a possession," Emily confessed softly, her voice thick with the weight of memory, "all I wanted was revenge. I wanted everyone to suffer as I did." Elijah's eyes met hers, reflecting the pain and understanding etched deep within. "I always knew you had fire inside," he said gently. "You just needed air to breathe." She smiled, a fragile light breaking through the shadows of her past. "Now I see," she whispered. "True freedom isn't just about breaking chains. It's about building a table where everyone can sit. Together, they had rewritten a story long told in whispers of despair, proving that dignity transcends color, class, and circumstance. The forces that once tried to break them had underestimated the quiet strength found in broken things. Strength that, like shattered glass catching the sun, reflected a light whole things never could. Beyond them, the train station's towers reached skyward, bold against the fiery horizon, a symbol not of conquest, but of connection and community. Inside the newly built classrooms, children gathered under the guidance of Emily's steady hand, their futures unfolding in lessons that spoke of justice, hope, and the power to change one's destiny. In City Hall, a diverse council met regularly, their voices weaving together plans to heal and uplift the community. Elijah often reminded his students that revolutions are not always loud or violent. Sometimes they are the steady building of bridges over old divides. As night deepened, the town breathed a different kind of life, one born not from the ashes of destruction, but from the promise of something better. And so, in the quiet strength of two souls who refused to be defined by others, Lakewood Springs found its true revolution, a future forged by courage, compassion, and an unbreakable belief in the worth of every human being.